Howdy, everyone. I've gotten some pieces parts in that I had ordered, and I'm going to talk about those real quick. I got a decent amount of things to talk about today. No real work per se. I just need to talk about like my thought process and kind of where I'm going now with this build. So anyway, if you remember, in the other videos, we had the wings attached to the fuselage, and I went ahead and set up the push-pull tubes and the aileron adjustment with the flaps and all that good stuff, right? And I had everything adjusted, and everything looked good, and I brought the wings and the fuselage back into the shop, and I had talked about taking the push-pull tubes out to verify the depth of the threads, and I wasn't exactly tickled to death with the number of threads that were threaded into the fitting. So I went ahead and I ordered some longer rod ends, and here they are. I got two, one for each push-pull tube for the ailerons. So this is the rod end that came with the kit. This is what was originally in the push-pull tubes, and this is what I was using out in the garage when I was fitting everything together. The jam nut is roughly where it ended up being real time in the airplane. And this is the best one. This one is probably just fine to use as is. And like I said, I think this is the best one actually. So this one is fine. But I believe it's this one here. That one is threaded out quite a bit more. And if you look at the other ends of the push-pull tube, where the rod end is still attached to the bell crank, if you look at those aren't threaded very much, in my opinion. So again, not getting the warm fuzzy feeling. This one is okay, but the other ones are kind of suspect, so I just went ahead and bought two long ones. And you can see the difference in length if I take the stock one and lay it up here next to the new one. The new one is a good, it's probably close to a ½ inch longer. I'm not exactly sure what the specs are. I don't remember. But I think it's at least 3/8, maybe a ½ inch longer than this one, which is plenty. Like I said, I'll use one of these on each push-pull tube. And then again, if I need to, I can always make a spacer to go here so that this can't unscrew itself. I hope that makes sense. I kind of did a video explaining how that works. I don't think I'll need to do a spacer with these longer ones, but if I do, I will. So the rod end thing is taken care of. Of course, since these have been removed, I'll have to go through my whole readjustment. When I get the wings back on the airplane, I'll have to make my alignments and adjustments again with the new rod ends. And then at that point, if I need to make spacers, I will. But that won't be, hopefully that won't be until the wings get attached permanently. But I have them now, so that's good. This can wait until that day comes, whenever that might be. So the next thing that I did, okay, so here, now we've got a lot to talk about. So here's what I planned on doing. All right, remember I've spent a lot of time working on the flaps, and I believe the way that the flaps are going to go together, when I have my handle riveted to this, when the handle is riveted in place, remember it's got the slot in it for that curved piece. That curved piece is going to be riveted to my center cover area. But I think in order to get that riveted curved piece up into the handle, this has to be unbolted. So you kind of fit that up into the handle, and then you lay the center cover down, and then you take this and lay it in place, and then you can bolt everything down. Obviously, before that happens, I have to put this push-pull tube in here, which is ready to go. But I also have potential wires that I want to run through here. So before I do anything else with the flaps, I want to make sure I've got my wires that need to be run through here in place. So that led me to working on my pitch servo. So in the process of working on the pitch servo, of course, you've got to put a hole in your bell crank here for the autopilot linkage running from the servo to the bell crank. So I've done that, and I can talk about that a little bit more in detail in a video coming up. But here's the mount. Obviously, I got the servo in place. I actually have it bolted in place, and it is safety wired. So this is permanent now. And I started thinking about running my wiring harness. I made up the wiring harness. You can see I didn't make the wiring harness. I'm sorry. Let me back up a little bit. This is the harness that came with the servo. Obviously, there's plenty of room here, so I went ahead and used the supplied connector. This is the supplied connector that came with the servo. I didn't use this connector on the wing, if you remember, because there wasn't enough room for it. It comes with a short black ground wire, and I went ahead and extended it just like I did on the wing servo, the roll servo. I just spliced in a nice long length of ground wire because I want to run my grounds all the way back to home, somewhere on the firewall potentially. So I got that all figured out and soldered and whatnot, and then I was trying to figure out exactly how I'm going to run these wires. And then I thought about, well, what about the ELT? Vans makes a kit that you can buy that basically you can mount an ELT like in this area here on either side of the fuselage. I started looking into that, and then of course I get out the ELT, and then I start looking at, oh, well, the ELT has an antenna. It needs that cable run, and it's got a remote switch on and off light switch deal that needs to be mounted in the cockpit on the some kind of control panel somewhere. So it's got some wiring to it and this and that. And then I started thinking about weight because I plan on running a composite prop, and I'm thinking, do I want an ELT back here, which is, back behind mid fuselage? And then I was thinking of running wires. I'm like, how am I going to run these wires? The wires for the ELT, the antenna wire, where am I going to mount the antenna? Does it need to be outside the airplane? Can it be inside the airplane? What if it's inside the airplane but is somewhere near the canopy? A lot of stuff to figure out. So then I thought about potentially mounting the ELT all the way up front here. And I know that's not the ideal location, and I can get into that later, but that's where I'm going to mount the ELT. I actually have it here. Here's my boost pump assembly. Here's my ELT bracket thing that I made, a flat plate with a piece of angle down the center of it to stiffen it. I've got this all mounted, ready to go. This is ultimately going to mount on top of the boost pump. I will cover that in detail later in yet another upcoming video. But of course, I've got my center console that's already made, which you can see there. And I've been fitting all this together. So far, so good. Like I said, I'll cover that later. But then I figured, well, before I get too far along in mounting my ELT, of course, I've got to mount the ELT to the boost pump, and I got to mount the boost pump to this area here. When you have this stuff mounted, you still need room for your manual trim cable. You need room for the cable that's going to control the carb or the cabin heat. That is in here. That flapper valve mechanism for the cabin heat mounts to the firewall. I have to put a hole in the firewall for that box. And of course, before I do that, this has to come out. This stuff here, this sheet metal in here has to come out so I can put that hole in there and mount the box. And then I have to figure out how to run the cable, get the cable past the boost pump, past the ELT, into my existing console that I've already made, and hope that nothing interferes. Hopefully the ELT won't get in the way of the cable. Of course, all of that needs to be done before I put in the rudder pedals and start running brake lines and things like that. But before all of that happens, I really should run my fuel lines that go in here and attach to the valve. So that was just a long-winded thought process of where I've been and where I am currently. And as of right now, the next thing that I'm going to do are these fuel lines. So I went from installing a pitch servo back there to running fuel lines, cutting holes in the firewall, mounting pumps, mounting ELTs, mounting the center console, putting in pedals, blah, blah, blah. So that's where I am. And I know it's been a long-winded explanation, but that's how it goes. Again, with these experimental airplanes, one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And before you know it, it's like, oh, today I'm going to mount my strobe on the tail. And when you work through it, you end up drilling a hole in the firewall. That's just how it goes sometimes. So everything that I just talked about is going to be put on hold. I'm going to switch gears a little bit yet again. And I'm going to go back to installing fuel line. And I do have my replacement fuel line. It just showed up yesterday. So I've got plenty of fuel line to make a couple more mistakes if needed. I'll get that in. Once I get the fuel line in, I can connect it to the valve. Once I have that done, I can go ahead and pull this center part out, put the hole in the firewall, clean up the mess, mount the cabin heat box, attach the cable to it, put this center part back together. Then I can mount the pump, mount the ELT, do some wiring, put the center console on, come back to the valve, do some work on it. So that's the plan. Whew. All right. I will talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening.